My 13 plus years across nearly every educational format, from wilderness therapy to founding schools, I found something that changed everything. The closer the education gets to the family model, the more powerful it becomes. Today, I'm sharing the data that proves why educational innovation is crushing traditional schools and why homeschooling sits at the top of the pyramid. Let's get a little context in the data that we're going to talk about today. Traditional public schools are losing ground to innovative educational models, and they're losing it fast. Homeschool growth has seen 300% plus increase since 2020, according to the US Census Bureau study in 2023. Private school enrollment is up 4%, while public school enrollment is down 3%. And microschools are growing 80% annually, according to EdChoice in 2023. The point is, all the other models that are becoming available to parents or more widely known are expanding because people are looking for other models. And traditional schooling is dropping fast. Now, 3% may not seem like a huge number, but when we think about the monopoly that public education has on the American public, this is a huge amount of students. And it's showing kind of the tip of the iceberg with regards to some of the unrest that parents are experiencing within their current educational format. People are widely looking for options, even though everybody hasn't jumped out to find something different and actually pull the trigger. It doesn't mean that that 3% that's already left isn't testifying to a much larger, I don't know, I don't want to say majority, but a much larger portion of the population that is open to or looking for change. I've seen this within my own experience, and probably you have with yours, because in the 90s, homeschooling was looked at with quite a bit of skepticism. There were a lot of people that thought that the weird kids were kind of isolated to homeschooling. This was my own line of thinking. But we have found today, not only is homeschooling expanding, but it's kind of becoming the place where normal people go to find shelter and kind of rescue their children from a school system that is trying to force something on them that they don't want to see. So, without getting into all the ideological stuff that has to do with people's issues that they take a lot of times with public education, we can simply say other models are expanding while the public school industry is going down. Looking at my own experience, I've been in a number of different educational formats, and each of which has infused me with a different layer of knowledge that's testified to the fact that the family model is the most powerful thing to lead to transformation. And so, anytime any format of education gets closer to that family model, the more transformation we see within the students themselves. So, I used to be a therapeutic wilderness educator. I lived year round with 10 at risk boys in an environment that looked as close to homeschooling as you can get without being parents and children. Meaning we lived together year round and all of life was a part of the comprehensive education that these boys would learn. And the reason was is they'd failed out of the system. Public school didn't work for them. Traditional education didn't work for them. A lot of times they'd experienced trauma and abuse or violence and crime, and they had just been in these cycles of failure which the system had kind of said, there's no hope for you. So we were like that last resort that someone would go to in their desperation to seek hope. And we had an 80% positive success rate where children experience the transformation and go through the program and successfully reintegrate to society. If you know anything about the numbers in an environment like this, those numbers are insane. And I really believe it's, of course, the philosophy of the program itself made a huge difference, but the family model that these children learned, where a lot of times the family stability was what was lacking in their own life. The family model really created a powerful means of not only creating a transformational education, but helping to reform these kids and build a sense of confidence and awareness and simple and practical life skills that actually sent them out into the world far better equipped than if they had stayed in a traditional public school system. Beyond that, I ran a classical Christian hybrid school. If you don't know anything about hybrid models of education, these take some of what people are used to within traditional schooling, like a classroom format, and they also pair it with increased responsibility for parents as home educators. So, in the context that I led, our school had 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, where it was teacher led within a traditional classroom context, teaching from a classical curriculum. But 2 days a week, that responsibility was handed over to parents, and it was a living partnership between the teachers and the parents as co educators for the children. Now, this was a really good model for parents who were interested in homeschooling, but maybe didn't feel the confidence to do everything themselves, or who wanted a classical education, but also wanted to be very much involved in their children's education. And again, we're looking for partnership. This school was a great opportunity to show that you can get amazing results, like far better than the public school peers, and still blend together some of the elements that people are used to from the other formats. So a traditional classroom with kind of normal teaching standards and following, a traditional curriculum, following the specific classical pedagogy was available. But what parents did at home, yes, they had direction with regards to lesson plans and the homework and the content, but they were able to do it in their own way and learn the skills of home education while they gain kind of greater awareness for how their own children learn. So, what a lot of parents would do would come for a couple of years, gain a greater sense of confidence, and then they would lean more heavily in homeschooling and eventually transition. For other families, they love the partnership and maybe they'd like us to be 5 days a week. I know in some contexts, parents would request that, but they loved the school and the format and the partnership so much that they weren't willing to sacrifice it. Now, an environment like this naturally has to foster partnership. And one of the things that schools get wrong, regardless of the format, is when they push parents away, the parents are the greatest resource and asset to children, to teachers. And so the further apart they are from each other, or the more they are on different pages, the worse the outcomes are actually going to be for the students. So anything, again, that pushes them together and forms these partnerships is going to ultimately bless the students and the outcomes for everybody. Beyond that, I helped to found a traditional private Christian school. Again, following a fairly traditional model, but what was unique about it is at its founding, at its inception, it's very family-like, right? When everything is new and young, it takes adaptability, it takes creativity, it takes positive feedback, and you have to be responsive to the needs and the requests of everybody there because you can't expect as something new have figured everything out already. Now, what's really good about this, in contrast to public education is slow and stiff and arthritic and inflexible, and that means change is incredibly difficult. Whereas in a new institution where everything is kind of being discovered as you go, feedback is essential and adaptability is essential in order to continue to press towards the best possible results. And so that we created a really positive family-like environment. The school, it's still a traditional model, which means it still has its own shortcomings, but it's able to become more closely aligned with a family model because of the parent partnership and the relationships that are formed as it reflects the flexibility that homeschooling already offers, unlike the rigidity that you see within most traditional education. And so each of these is showing this pattern. Every successful environment started with some shared family-like characteristics, right? In the wilderness education, we are essentially mirroring what high quality homeschooling could look like. In the hybrid, we're partnering with parents in a traditional school homeschool model. And then in the traditional school, at its founding, has the flexibility and the partnership required to have a closer relationship to parents that shows more family likeness and ultimately led to a really successful launch. Right? Going from 0 students to 125 in less than a year in a new private school with a full tuition is not easy. And it was a testimony to what we were doing well. Right? So I was able to kind of take all of that from my personal experience and see there's something here. This pattern I've been able to see as I've expanded kind of into my own personal awareness of the homeschooling space is when it's working, these elements, this family model and this family likeness, it's always in there somewhere. And so let's look at some of the data in regards to some of these different models. Micro schools have a 2-to-1 learning gain versus traditional schools. This is from a Prentice study in 2023. Again, 2-to-1. So when you have a really small environment, just a few, sometimes as much as 10 students and multiple parents helping lead the education, you're going to get a 2-to-1 increase or return on your investment. Uh, and again, 95% parent satisfaction rates. That's because in micro schools, the parents are so close to the education that the chance of it slipping outside of their purview and outside of their values and outside of um, what makes them comfortable and excited about the results that are being generated, they're very, very low. In classical education, SAT scores average 100 plus points higher than traditional schools. This was from a Ray study in 2023. And then there's an 85% college acceptance rate from classically educated students versus 69% of their publicly schooled peers. And then let's look at homeschooling. Academic achievement is 15 to 30 percentile points higher than their publicly schooled peers. This is a huge gap. The average starting place for homeschoolers is 15 to 30 percentile points higher. That's like going from a F average of 50% for public school to an 80% average for homeschoolers. That is a huge difference, right? It's a big pass fail score. And then 87% of homeschool students graduate from college versus 57% of their publicly schooled peers, which is just again testifying to the ultimate end outcomes in these other formats of education being far superior to just the traditional approach that most people are fitting into. So, if you're looking for change and homeschooling doesn't work for you right now, the important thing is to look for options, to understand what is available to you, and also to see this key component that I've seen over time, which is how much is this modeling the family model or reflecting it? And how much family likeness is there within this format of education? Because that's probably going to testify to the opportunity and the possibility of greater success. Let's talk about why these models work. First off, there's individualized attention. Again, just think about the wilderness education experience I had. I lived 24 hours a day with these kids, helping them work through their problems. What does that sound like? That sounds like you as parents. At least, let's say before you send your kids to school, if assuming that you've done that, your first 5 years, they don't go anywhere. They're with you. And this was the format that we offered in this type of education. They were with us. And so we didn't just learn our traditional subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic. Yeah, that was there too, but it was fused into every element of life. We cooked together, we built together, we cleaned together, we walked together, we talked together. We tucked them into bed. Like every component of what a child needs for healthy development and family was reflected in this format of education, right? So this individualized attention means that the kids' needs are always being responded to because they're just there. The transition from handing a kid off to teachers at school and then back to parents, often something gets missed and all the information is never going to be passed on. But this allowed us to see everything all the time and, like a parent, to be adaptable to the individual needs of our students. So there's values alignment. There has to be values alignment between the home and the education for you to really maximize the benefits that you're getting. And usually, when you start to look at some of these alternative forms of education that parents are starting to explore, you're going to see values pushed much more forward as an important factor that parents are considering. And, for instance, when you join a micro school of 5 to 10 other students, you're going to find that you're going to join that in part because of the alignment that you find in your values with those other families and students. There's flexible pacing that adapts to a child's needs. Again, traditional schools are so rigid that they have to teach to the middle. And because they're always teaching in the middle, those who are advanced are always bored and always waiting and always ahead, but never able to go further. And those who are behind are always struggling, always missing concepts, and never able to catch up. Basically, no one is truly being served. The chances of it being perfectly aligned to any one student is essentially 0% because it's always teaching to the middle, which is this average, which never really truly serves everybody where they're at. These small, flexible alternatives allow for the teacher, the parent, the educator to adjust and to cater more to the individual needs of the students that are there. And then a relationship based learning approach over an institutional processing approach, right? Institutions are not primarily concerned with a relationship. They're just not. When you're serving thousands, you have to systematize everything. But again, imagine being in a micro school, having 5 students that you see every day and not prioritizing relationship. If one relationship is out of sorts for 5 students, then 20% of your class is out of sorts, right? That's a huge percentage. It ends up naturally having to be relationship based and getting to be relationship based because it's smaller and more personalized. And then parent involvement as a primary stakeholder. In each of these formats, you're going to find a significant increase in parent involvement. And you'll see every time a direct correlation between parent involvement and student outcomes. Students will get better outcomes the more involved their parents are. Hence, I tend to advocate first and foremost for homeschooling because you're going to have the most parent involvement by far. And because this relationship is the most important, when you enfold your child's education into it, you're just going to render better results every single time. And then there's the competition effect. Think about it. If public school is the only option and you have to do it, it never has to get better. They can render terrible results annually, which in many cases is what has and is happening. But nothing will change because they get guaranteed income regardless of whether they're doing a good job. So what does that mean? When we start to see more parents voting with their feet, going to microschools, going to homeschooling, going to private schools, traditional schools, public schools are losing funding, and money talks, and empty classes talk. The more empty a public school is, the more inefficient it is, and the more costly it becomes. And that cost is going to start requiring reform and change because they're going to lose their opportunity to serve. And if these schools get too empty, we're already seeing it in different places, especially as we have the smallest generation of students rising up right now. Schools are going to start closing, which means if they are not becoming the best, then they're going to find themselves on the chopping block. Competition drives innovation and it drives reform. School choice drives improvement. This is huge. Every single state where you've seen school choice become a bigger and bigger option, meaning more of that funding is following the student rather than following the school system, we're seeing states with robust choice programs starting to see improvement in the outcomes of their public schools as well, because more people are leaving the public school and the public schools are being forced to fight for those seats, to finally start fighting for their students, which means they actually have to listen to what parents say. And you may be surprised to hear this hasn't been happening, but now that it's starting to, everybody gets to see improved results. Will I still advocate for homeschooling? Certainly. But in general, I'm an advocate for everybody getting better options. And when we have competition, public schools start to become better options for everybody. Right? So the innovation pressure, traditional schools adopting homeschool-like methods. This is something we're starting to see more and more as traditional schools respond to what's working in other formats, right? We've seen this trend for a lot of homeschoolers taking what they know, right? They are trying to imitate a traditional school, but from home because that's the experience they have. Well, now we're seeing that reverse, where we're seeing traditional schools trying to imitate what's working in homeschooling because it's working. And so they're trying to capture a little bit of what's going on there so they can bring it into their format of education and hopefully try to keep parents, in their classrooms. Um, what else? There's the market response. There's the ed tech boom, serving family-centered education. There's so many different models of education that are becoming available, a lot of them being technology driven, right? There's school from home formats where children can attend a public or a private institution. A lot of charter schools have things like this where they can do their learning from home, but still follow the curriculum and the guidance of an institution, of an accredited institution. That's one option. There are things like Khan Academy and different programs that are providing parents with more digital resources that they can use to actually provide the instruction with greater confidence. Basically, more resources, more equipping, more power for parents, more opportunity to feel the ability for the larger portion of parents to say, hey, I can do this too. And that's a good thing because the hardest thing for parents is starting. Once you actually start homeschooling, oftentimes parents find, I can do this. This was the aha moment that so many parents had during the pandemic because school got forced into their home. They got to see firsthand the kind of instruction that their children were receiving. And they were doing some of the, I don't know, trying to like correct some of what they were seeing and realize, oh my goodness, I can do this better. Like I'm literally seeing what's happening and it's not working. And I know that I can do it better. So even though parents didn't start with this huge amount of confidence in many cases, they started. And because they started making gains and growing and realized they actually can do a better job and they can get better at it. And more importantly, they can enjoy the process with their children and family. So let's address the "but I can't homeschool" objection, right? Because this is always going to find its way in. Everyone has a particular situation, a particular context, and maybe in your situation right now, you don't feel like you can homeschool. It could be a financial constraint, it could be an emotional constraint, it could be a relational constraint. You just don't feel like you have the relational equity with your spouse or with your children to be able to move into this bold new format of education. Well, you have options. There's the hybrid option: classical conversation, co-ops, part-time programs. The hybrid school that I taught at was an option that parents could start participating in homeschooling while not doing everything and start to learn the skills of becoming a home educator. There's micro school pods where there's shared teaching responsibilities between parents, but you don't have to do everything alone. Right? You get to gain the skills of home education while also having partnership with other parents. There's online academies where it structures the format of education for your child, but it still allows some of the family flexibility that you may require. And the progression. Many families start with alternatives, grow in confidence, but they work towards ultimately truly homeschooling, where they're leading a personalized homeschool program for their children. And so if you have to kind of get your feet wet with one of these other options that makes sense for where you are right now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like the purist for homeschooling is the only ideal and everyone else is kind of like something less. Look, you may find yourself arriving here, but it may be a journey. I've seen many parents walk on a journey where they, again, dip their toe into the water, start taking steps forward, and eventually grow to the full confidence to be able to lead their own program with mastery in a way that brings the outcomes and results that they want for their children. So why homeschooling remains, in my opinion, the gold standard: you have the ultimate customization option. There's no institutional constraints. I say homeschooling is like the unlimited freedom and flexibility option for parents. Now, for some people, that's terrifying because there's so much freedom and flexibility. But you will find that as you gain experience, you don't do everything all the time. You find that you can flex to what works specifically for your family. And because of that, there's none of that arthritic nature of the public school. You can adapt and flex to your needs as a family, to your personal mental health needs, to your children's needs, without losing a step in your child's education. And this is huge. There's a complete values alignment. All right, again, no institution, no matter how small or personalized it is, can ever 100% align with your values and the values of everyone else there. There's always going to be a little bit of teaching to the middle or serving the middle. And because of that, the only 100% values alignment form of education that is available for parents is truly homeschooling. Not online academies, but homeschooling your way, where it is in alignment with your values and your goals for your children. And then there's, again, that maximum flexibility. You can adapt to your child's needs as often as you need, right? If you're struggling with a child that has learning differences or learning disabilities, we can work with that, right? If they have ADHD, if they have a short attention span, we can work with that. It doesn't matter what the challenge is, you can work with that. And then the strongest relationship. The parent-child relationship is the most important relationship that you will ever have until they have grown into full maturity and are ready to launch on their own. Hopefully that maintains, but that strength of relationship is the foundation of the education that you're building for your children. And when you homeschool truly, you don't have to sacrifice that relationship. So a couple of practical takeaways: research your local options. Okay, see what options are available for you where you are right now, both your online options as well as the local ones. Investigate microschools, classical schools, and co-ops in your area and see what's available if you're not fully ready to plunge into homeschooling. Start where you are. Even small moves toward your family-centered education is going to create benefits. This is what I learned. Everything that we did that was closer to the family model had greater positive effect. And so even if you're not plunging all the way in, just take a step forward. And then track data. Document your child's progress. Any alternative model versus traditional school. Like, you know their grades, you know where they are if they're in public school right now. So when you decide to make change, make sure you're tracking what's different, what's better. Not only the kind of personal and relational stuff, but the academic outcomes as well. And build community. Connect with other families who are doing what you're doing, who are making steps towards their family, and learn and grow together. And then consider the progression. View alternatives as stepping stones toward fully homeschooling. Again, If you're not doing it right now, that's okay. But if you're making steps in that direction, that is a good thing. And then evaluate annually. Assess whether your current model is serving your family's mission and goals. And if it is, you can keep moving forward, or you can adapt in a way that continues to move you closer towards those goals. There's so much that we do within the Homeschool Mastery Group to help parents with this process, whether it's clarifying your mission and your values, helping you understand your different educational options, or creating a transition plan where you can move toward fully homeschooling. The important thing is find community and find connections during the process as you are on your journey towards growing. Whether you're ready for full homeschooling or exploring your first steps away from the traditional school, you don't have to figure this out alone. Start your free trial today at the Homeschool Mastery Group, and you'll get access to our educational options assessment. Connect with other families on similar journeys, or join our weekly Q&As and get your questions answered to figure out what steps forward you can take to move into homeschooling or figuring out the model that's right for your family where you are right now. Thanks so much for joining us. And remember, we're here to grow yourself so that you can grow your kids.